Hello everyone, welcome back to alkaline hydroxide 784, and today in the history series we'll be looking at the next content episode, which is paper 2 theme 1. And in theme 1, which the thing that we have chosen is I think this is a national unity one because that seems like what I've actually put there. And instead of going to Google Docs, I'll be using the Word document, and you'll know why in 3, 2, 1. Yeah. So this document here is in the landscape format, and I think it's easier to see it when I use the entire screen to show it rather than just squeeze it in that little space where you can see it. And I realized I can actually hide my name here, so makes things so much easier for me. I don't need to hide it with some ugly looking blurry thing. Okay, so as you can see here, I made this into a split screen so that you can still see the top row and not be confused about which country it is. And the basic idea here is that we have a table with a bunch of factors, and generally for paper 2, that's the easiest way to go around doing things because it's all centered around a bunch of countries and you need to compare those countries. So the easiest way to do it is to put a table. Only thing is it'll be quite messy if you put it in portrait format, so you have to put it in landscape. So these are the 7 factors we'll be looking at today, which is ethnic diversity, geographical diversity, the colonial/historical experiences, animosity between the communities itself, the kinds of policy in the sense, including economic ones as well, and also the minorities and external influence. Okay, so now that you've seen that, let me drag this up so I can see more of the actual stuff, I guess. And I'll just bring the country things up here. Okay, great. So the very first factor is ethnic diversity. And in terms of ethnic diversity, what that means is how diverse the population is, what kinds of races you have there, whether there's a huge majority or whether there's a lot of, it's a bit more fragmented in terms of distribution, and that can affect a lot of things. So let's look at that. So in terms of Burma, we have 70% Burmese, and the dominant religion is Buddhism, but they do have a lot of minority groups as well. So we'll be looking at what their influences are later on. So in Indonesia, we have a really diverse bunch of people. I mean, I guess they're all technically like part of the Malay. I'm not sure how it's like the Malay subcontinent in the sense, and there's different groups including the Javanese, which is the supposed majority even though it's only 45%. So you can see we already have a bit of a problem. But there's one thing in which they have a huge majority, which is that there's 90% Islam. Although they do, but that means that there is a 10% of other religions as well. So in the Philippines, it is also a bit of a problem. It is somewhat similar to Indonesia's issue, which is that we do have like a lot of Filipinos, but those people include like there's a lot of groups within Filipinos as well, and you can see all these here. And also the religion is not as majority as compared to Indonesia and Burma. Here we actually have only 82%, and 82% is not majority enough to completely get rid of all problems. So yeah. In Thailand we have mostly Thai, and there's also a huge Chinese minority in a sense, and there's also the main religion there is Buddhism, which is more than 82%, and there's a pretty big minority of Islam in terms of like in a place that is very near Malaysia. Okay, and here we have Singapore. Singapore is a very interesting case because we have 4 main races, although the majority is Chinese, and even they are like immigrants in the sense that like a lot of the people here today were immigrants, maybe 30-40 years ago or even 50-60 years ago. So it's actually, I don't know, it's a very long time ago, basically a very long time ago, even before independence. So I guess it should be like more than 60 years ago. And there are many immigrants in Singapore as well, so that is Singapore. And Malaysia is, well, they also don't have a particularly great majority, even though they do consider their majority so-called, what's that thing called? Okay, I forgot what that's called. And they have, yeah, the majority is Malay, and they have the other races as well, and as well as a pretty big minority of Aboriginal groups. And even the religion is not that big of a majority. They only have about 60% Islam if you compare that with Indonesia. Yeah, and finally we have wait, I can't actually see this. Oh, Vietnam. Yeah, Vietnam is uh yeah, they have a pretty big, like, you know, majority, I guess. Like they have 87% Kin, which is one of the groups, like the Vietnamese kind of group, and then they have a small Chinese minority as well as other minorities. And the thing is, for them, religion isn't that big of a deal, but they do have Buddhist and minority religion of Catholicism. Right, so that's the things to take note of, because that is one of the important factors to consider when you look at even of the like the other factors as well. They are quite influenced by the fact that there's this current, like the initial conditions kind of thing. Right, so apart from ethnic diversity, we have to look at geographical diversity. And that's another very important thing, because if you're managing a country, how big a country is does matter a lot, like whether you can easily go to the edges of your country or not. And yeah, as you can see, Burma has, like, the main problem in Burma is that there is a lot of hilly regions, and the hill tribes are generally separated from the mainland Burma. And it's and therefore, if they have any policies, you're less likely to think about the hill tribes because they're just sort of separated from everyone else. And it's because of geography, not really because of any other reason per se. And in Indonesia, we know how many islands are there. They have a lot of islands, and it's really hard to unify all of those islands. I mean, some of them don't have flights, some of them you have to go by ship or something, and that is a troublesome thing to do. And the same thing for the Philippines, they have a lot of islands. It is a bit better than Indonesia, but they still have a lot of islands. And in Thailand, they are quite big actually. You can say there's a big difference between going to Bangkok and going to Chiang Mai. Yeah, alright, Shanghai. Okay, actually I don't know which is which. Never mind. Okay, so uh just ignore what I just said. Okay. So they have a lot of land as well as the hill tribes in the northeast. Okay, so in of course Singapore, I think everyone knows how tiny it is, so let's move on. Malaysia is okay. It has this one mainland in Sabah and Sarawak. It is a big state, like big country compared to Singapore, of course, and it is, but it is not super fragmented compared to Indonesia and Philippines. So yeah. And Vietnam, well, the thing about Vietnam is that it's really long. Like if you look at it in a map, it just looks like it's been stretched out around like Thailand and Cambodia and all that. So it is long. That is one thing for sure. And there's also this historical separation that has happened in the past due to the Vietnam War. Although I hope it is not too separated, because unlike Korea, Vietnam managed to get together. So I guess they're okay, hopefully. Right, so that's geographical diversity. So the next one is colonial experience. So in terms of colonial experience, the kind of colonial experience can influence how the people in each country decide to do their independence. And you know what I mean when we look through this stuff here. So in Burma, there was the British rule, and the thing is, the British rule tended to focus more on the mainland, and sorry, not mainland. Like they had more controls in the mainland as compared to the frontiers and the hills, because as you can see, the hills still had their leaders, and meanwhile the mainland was under direct British rule. Which means that the Burmese are a little bit salty against the minorities because they kind of got the good end of the stick, I guess. a good, like the carrot rather than the stick. I don't know what I'm saying, but you get the idea. And in the end, like the minorities aren't so into opposing the British, was while the mainland people were definitely very anti-colonialist. So these things are highlighted because I was supposed to type some stuff and I didn't type it, so just ignore that. So in Indonesia, we had a lot of different colonial experiences because especially East Timor and uh, Irian Jaya, and they had colonial experience under Portuguese and Dutch. And this led to, like, this was much more intense than the rest of Indonesia. So is it much more intense? But like the thing is, they were originally under the Portuguese, and then when the Dutch came around, they just wanted to take over everything, and it was just a big mess. So they eventually wanted to leave Indonesia once and for all. Um, and yeah, so the Aceh, in Aceh, they have their own historical tradition, and therefore they also wanted to be independent. This is probably not very related to colonialism, but rather their own history in a sense, yeah. And in the Philippines, we have yeah, this is the one where we have a difference between the mainland and one area of Philippines. And in Mindanao, they were actually an independent kingdom, and somehow they suddenly were ceded to U.S. control when Philippines was under it. And this is even though the Mindanao were not under the Spanish, and this doesn't make sense, right? Like they're just doing their own thing, and then suddenly the U.S. comes and takes them just because they got control over Philippines. It doesn't make sense, but that's what happens because that's how it is. And because of that, they were quite harshly treated as compared to the rest of the Philippines under the U.S. rule. And once Philippines became independent, they also did not want to be part of Philippines because they were like, why did you trouble us? We were just, peacefully being an independent kingdom, and you basically forced us to be part of you. Kind of. And also the US have certain discriminatory rules, even though the US was a little bit nicer compared to British and Dutch and all that. They were still pretty discriminatory, especially with regards to Mindanao. So they had secular education with non-Muslim teachers, which is definitely against Mindanao. And also, they were quite, like, they were trying to get rid of, use the ancestral lands for their own, like, private use, I guess, which is obviously not very respectful at all. And that definitely makes Mindanao not want to be part of Philippines. Yeah, okay. So for Thailand, we have the fact that Thailand is one of the rare countries that doesn't get colonialism, which is rather interesting because they were an independent kingdom for the most part. And yeah, the problem is Patani was just one of those kingdoms that were there, and they were conquered by Thailand, like ancient Thailand, aka Siam. And because the British recognized the fact that the Siamese controlled Patani, they didn't include Patani into Malaysia. So yeah, now they're just like stuck in this awkward decision between being in Thailand versus relating to Malaysia, if you know what I mean. Yeah. This is actually more relevant for the inter-country disputes and also just in general about the Patanis in general. Yeah. So in Singapore, well, we can see what I've written there. I think you know what I'm talking about. Singapore was used as an entrepot rather than, like they didn't really intend to make it an actual colony, but eventually it was under British control. And then, the British basically lost the war against the Japanese, and then after that they helped to get back Singapore, and then Singapore became independent and stuff like that. So I have no idea what that was. Okay, so Singapore is, well, okay with the British. Okay. And yeah, Malaysia, I think rather than in terms of the country itself, it was more of the British preferentially treating certain races over others, especially they preferentially treat the Chinese over the Malays and all that. So that is more of an inter-country dispute rather than with regards to British itself. And in Vietnam, oh my gosh, Vietnam, they really had a crazy history right there. Because Vietnam were like, they were originally occupied by French. Wait, were they? Like they had to fight against the Japanese, the French, and the US. So like they had to fight against so much of people. Yeah, okay. So if we're gonna look at the US part of it, which is where in South Vietnam there was a US installed no Ding Diem, who people hated. And in the end, Viet Minh in the north was so popular that the Viet Cong kind of like became a thing in the south to help them. And that's why I say that I feel like even though Vietnam went through a war, I think they're pretty united in a sense because they prefer each other to, US or anyone else for that matter. Okay, so now with regards to the colonialism, there's also a historical context in how they got out of colonialism. So yeah. So in terms of Burma, we have the fact that there's a struggle to get out of British control. It's a bit like how India had a struggle to get out of British control. The same thing for Burma. And yeah, and they had their own, Burmese way to socialism, and they did their things like that. So that was their ideology that they were using to rule the country after independence. So Indonesia, they also had a pretty violent exit, which is they had to fight off the Dutch because the Dutch were like, okay, fine, we'll leave you alone, and then they don't leave them alone, and therefore Indonesia had to fight off the Dutch. And because of that, they have a thing to unify the people, which is the Pancasila. Yeah. Although I'm pretty sure it's just that's what they have. Okay. So the Philippines, in terms of history, they had a very peaceful independence because the US was actually not so, colonialist, as more of it just wanted to take control of all the economic stuff. So that's what US really cares about. And yeah, it just allowed Philippines to become independent. That's why they don't really have a real narrative to, rally the people around. And another problem is that within Philippines, there's a lot of political divisions and stuff like that. Like there's politics, there's the class division, there's all kinds of trouble within Philippines, and that means not a lot of unity slash identity per se. Yeah, so alright. Okay, so for Thailand, we know it was never colonized, but since they had a monarchy, that is their identity and that is their unifying force. And yeah, they actually do care about their monarchy quite a bit. He has like the king has a very big influence in Thailand. So Singapore, well, I think you know what I'm talking about here. We just have some narrative. I guess the Japanese occupation is probably the most influential part of the narrative, but the thing is nowadays people like the people who are born nowadays probably don't even understand what exactly happened in the Japanese occupation, so it's a bit hard to rally them around something when they don't even understand it. Oh well. But anyway, that's one thing. And Malaysia as well, we the British were like, okay, since everyone else is basically leaving me, I'm just gonna let you leave me as well. Bye. And then Singapore ended up getting kicked out of Malaysia again, which is even worse way to become independent. Maybe in terms of giving a historical story, it's not really an exciting story. The only thing they could do was to end up putting like the fact that Lee Kuan Yew was like crying over it, and that was the most drama they can get out of this story. I mean I'm saying it in a very practical sense. Like if you want a good way to rally your people, you need an interesting story, and we don't really have the most interesting story. But there's one country that definitely has the most interesting story, which is Vietnam, and they had to fight the war against the French, the Japanese, and the Americans. Oh my gosh. I feel so bad for them because they had to fight against so many people to get to where they are today. And yeah, the Viet Minh is super revered because they literally brought independence to Vietnam. Yeah, that is the historical context and identity in a sense. So now let's look at historical animosity instead. So you're talking about Burma earlier with the hill tribes getting a bit more, slack from the British in the sense, and because of that, the Karens, I don't know how to pronounce this, but the Karens, no, Karens just sounds like the boomer name. Is that the wrong way to pronounce it? Okay, never mind. So, this this minority group basically wanted to support the British because the British was somewhat nicer to them, and because of this, they were against the mainland Burmese, and this is definitely a good way to create tensions. Yes, indeed, lot of tensions, and this is also the foundation for other things that they could be opposed to in a sense in terms of policies and stuff like that. As for the rest, I didn't write down anything. Interesting. Malaysia, I just put at most Chinese Malay tensions. Okay, I guess that's not as big as this, so this is the only thing I really had to say. I think for the rest is more of what I mentioned earlier, like for example, Thailand, we have Aceh wanting to be an independent state of its own, or like the East Timor and all that. Then Philippines, you have Mindanao. And Thailand, you have the Patanis. Although I guess more than animosity is rather that they feel not belong, like they feel like they don't belong. That's the real reason rather than them feeling animosity towards the other people in their country, like the majority people. Okay, so the next factor is the language, religion, and education. So, right, this is important too. Like, if the government manages to account for everyone and take everyone into consideration when they do their education, it's a lot easier to get the minorities to accept your policies. But if you don't, then good luck to you. Right. So in Burma, well, they decided to go with the majority route, which is use Burman for, is it Burman or Burmese? I don't know. Okay, so they use the language for education and business, and the religion is Buddhist state ideology under UNU, which means that the hill tribes are not particularly excited about this because they purposely try to penetrate Buddhism into the hill tribes using the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and they also promote and sponsor Buddhism. And education is state control, which means that it promotes Buddhism, and that means the other religious schools were all closed down, and that does not seem like a good idea. Okay, right. So, if you're promoting one single religion, yeah, this is a good way to create some tensions. Okay, I mean, it's a reason for creating tensions. So in Indonesia, we have they decided to use their national language, Bahasa Indonesia, and actually it is a pretty neutral language because it's kind of I guess language is the least of the problems. It's mostly the religion that usually creates the problems, I guess. Yeah. In terms of religion, they have official state patronage of Islam, but they do it carefully. So hopefully, like people don't feel too like the minorities don't feel too oppressed by the fact that Indonesia cares about Islam in a sense. And yeah, I guess I hope it's okay. So the education, they tend to focus on the Javanese side of things. So there's a Javanese monopolization of national and independence history, which would kind of alienate the minorities in a way. Okay, so in terms of Philippines, as you can see, Tagalog is a national language, although not a lot of people use it. Oops. But this, as I said, for language is not the biggest issue. Usually, it's actually the religion that tends to be the biggest issue. So the religion is, well, they supposedly have secular policies, but they are quite biased towards Catholicism. So in education, they have like a secular education, but with a Christian influence, and they have a bilingual education policy in 1974, which gives English and Filipino slash Tagalog. Yeah. And the thing is, they did give some provision to study in Arabic in the Muslim areas slash any other regional languages that they have there, which sounds pretty good, I guess. It's better than nothing. So in Thailand, well, we already know how Thailand works. They have their wonderful religion, state, king, and all that stuff. So their religion is the official state patronage of Buddhism. Their language is of course Thai because Thailand, Thai, and the education is their, I guess, whatever they teach about their kingdom, I guess. And they have a standardized curriculum and it's conducted in Thai and they mainly talk about Buddhism. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It doesn't sound that it sounds a bit like very one single thing, and they did try to modernize a bit by having they have some modern civic and democratic values, but apparently I think they were still kind of related to Buddhism values or something like that. I'm not sure, I don't remember. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. And the thing is, they tried to spread Buddhism into the hill tribe through these programs, which I'm not going to read. You can read them yourself because it's written there and therefore you can read them. Yeah, so in Singapore, we have our multicultural, our multiracial, multi whatever policy. So we have like English as the official medium because it is, more of like a standardized lingua franca kind of thing. And our mother tongues are also national languages in a sense. And we are also quite tolerant towards religion. We put all the temples and the churches and the mosques and any other religious places, because I probably don't remember the names of different religious places, sorry. But yeah, we give the space and the allowance for people to practice their religion as long as it is not too extreme or anything like that. Yeah. And in terms of education, as I said, we use our lingua franca, which is English, and we have the bilingual policy, which is mandated so that people will learn their mother tongue. Which kind of seems like good and all because it allows everyone to learn their language also and not feel alienated. And we, instead of teaching any particular religion or anything, we teach national values in schools and stuff like that. Okay, so in Malaysia, it is okay. I guess for Malaysia they have different ways of doing things. They use officially Malay and English, and they have an official religion which is Islam, but they are fine with people practicing other religions. And education, they usually use Malay because I guess it makes sense. They're Malaysia. Malay is their national language, and they use English as well. And it also allows certain private schools to use Chinese or Tamil as their instructional language. And yeah, that is the case. You can definitely see quite a few schools that are particularly catered to Chinese or Tamil, and that's pretty interesting. And what they teach in school is Rukun Negara, which is kind of like our national values, but yeah, it's just something that they teach in schools. No one really cares about the national values or the Rukun Negara. Oh no. Okay. In Vietnam, Vietnamese, the thing about Vietnam is that since they have such a huge majority, for them this probably doesn't matter all that much. So their language that they use is Vietnamese, and they don't really care about religion all that much, so they don't have like an official religion or anything, which is good. It makes all the people who actually do have a religion not have to be worried about following it. And they have education, which in this case, instead of religion, we look at communism instead. So they advocate for communist values in their education, and they allowed for instruction in minority languages, which is a big thing, of course. Yeah. So that's what the education was like. Language, religion, education. Okay. So this is the next one, which is transmigration. Okay, so transmigration is something that involves the majority of like a majority population going into a minority area. So this is seen in Indonesia and Philippines, and in Indonesia it was the movement of families from Java and Madura to outer islands, and this is problematic because they're kind of displacing the minorities by becoming the majority in a minority area, and this lead to certain violence and stuff like that. So we have the 2001 Madurese Dayak violence in central Kalimantan. And in Philippines, we have transmigration from the Luzon and the Visayas into Mindanao. And as you can see, this is what I meant by displacing the minorities. Here, the Muslims, like the percentage of Muslims in Mindanao was from 76% in 1903 to 19% in 1990. So that's a huge group of people to come there to displace that many, like to reduce the proportion of the native people, like the people who were originally there, like the native group, I guess. I'm not sure how to put it. Okay, yeah. So that's transmigration, and this leads to tensions between the minority and majority as well. So do take note of that. So apart from that, we have economic exploitation, as I've highlighted here the stats. So if you do have stats, then do insert it into this section because it will help you to explain it a little bit better. So in Burma, what do I mean by economic exploitation? Basically, they're exploiting a minority resource or something like that for economic gain and not giving them the money that they need, in a sense. So in Burma, we have the sandalwood exploitation in the Shan state. Indonesia, we have the fact that even though, Irian and Aceh, like they contribute a lot of good resources, but they don't get the money back. They are quite poor in the end. I guess that's why they don't want to be part of Indonesia. Okay, so Philippines, we have Marcos building some hydroelectric dam in Cordillera. It is kind of like local economic exploitation because the people are just doing their things and then you suddenly go and build a dam there and then you get the money out of that. So yeah, there's protests from there. And in Thailand, the Northeast was only given 18% of the state budget, even though it had 34% of the population, which is kind of like a exploitation in a way. And of course, we have the southern regions of Thailand, especially Patani, and they had a lower GDP than Malaysia's Kelantan. Yeah, that's why they want to be part of Malaysia and not Thailand, which is, understandable, definitely very understandable. And here, yeah, nothing else much to say. So next one is use of suppressive force. Okay, in Burma we have heavy, like the harsh military suppression. So this is against minorities, not really against political opponents or anything, but more against minorities. So that's what I'm referring to in terms of use of suppressive force. So in Burma, they have a suppression of the Karens, and yeah, okay, you can read the details yourself. In Indonesia, we have suppression in Timor and in Aceh. And this is usually in response to a protest or something like that. So when that happens, it only serves to escalate tensions further unless they really manage to completely like suppress the whole thing altogether. But usually it's quite hard to do that, and it leads to even greater tensions, which is very problematic. So yeah, in the Philippines, okay, so that's why this next row here is like the increased focus on minority development, which could be a different way of reacting to the protest by the minority in a sense. So in Burma, like they had that military suppression, and we then have Aung San Suu Kyi's campaign for minorities, and then nowadays I'm not sure what's going on. Yeah, okay. So Indonesia, they had, like, because of this, right, the fact that they suppressed it, it led to the independence of East Timor because the tension got so high that they just had to become independent in the end. Like Indonesia couldn't keep it. It was too hard if you think about it in a way. Yeah, they didn't really, like, that is what happens when you don't respond to the minorities' request properly, and you end up creating a even greater tension. Okay, so in the Philippines, we have the Jabaida massacre, which led to the formation of the MNLF in Mindanao. And yeah, this is leading to a lot of protests and even greater tensions. So when there's protests, they send in troops, and this is a human rights violation, and then they have the CPDF. You have to find out what they mean yourself because I don't remember. Okay, so in Thailand, we have the 1948 Dusun Rebellion over the imprisonment of Haji Sulong, and this was from the Muslims, and yeah, this was suppressed. So the government suppressed this rebellion by Muslims, and a lot of people got killed and stuff like that. So there's all these issues. And for this, nothing much to say. Okay. Yeah, so I already mentioned this in 1990s. Okay, so next one is ceasefires, autonomy agreements. So ceasefires/autonomy agreements could help you prevent more tensions. And in Burma, they tried, and then it broke down by 1999. I'm not sure what happened after that. Okay. In Indonesia, we already know that East Timor became independent, so that's a done story. In Philippines, we have Aquino in 1989, who reopened negotiations, and this led to the autonomous regions in Muslim Mindanao. And Ramos reached a peace agreement with MNLF and allowed them to see the development in Mindanao. However, this ended up breaking down by 2000 because the government wasn't willing to cede full control, and this led to breakdown of negotiations and stuff like that. Okay, so that's for Mindanao. And for the Cordillera, which is the mountainous regions, I believe, yeah, Aquino gave negotiations with CPLA, and Ramos signed an executive order to form the CAR, which I think is the autonomous region. And because of Cordillera factionalism, like they are already segmented within themselves, so they are not very united in their own front, which led to some problems, and there's no autonomous region even by 2005. Okay, so that is for ceasefire/autonomy agreements. I don't know why I wrote corruption and didn't write anything here, but I guess you can talk about it if you want. There was a lot of corruption in some of these countries, so yeah. Okay, so next one is implementation differences. Okay, so implementation difference is where they implement something but it's different for different groups of people. There's nothing much to really say here. I just mentioned, oh, Philippines got the Christian bias causing problem, and Malaysia is like official assimilation but unofficial compromise. Okay, so what this means is like they officially are like fine with everyone, but unofficially, wait, is it? Sorry, sorry. Officially, they're like, oh, all of you, everything is the same for everyone. I guess like they force everyone, they're supposedly forcing everyone to do the same thing, but unofficially, there's a lot of compromise, even with the minorities, and that leads to that kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense. So yeah. It's like the economic deals and stuff like that. That's what I'm referring to. So like even though they officially say, oh, you cannot get this thing, unofficially they're like, okay, we'll just let you do this deal. I'm fine with it. It's just that officially we don't allow it. Yeah, okay. So it's a bit like how they have all these private schools and stuff like that. Yeah, it's the same logic. Officially, they're like, oh, our official thing is Malay and we follow Islam and all that stuff. But unofficially, we have private schools. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so this is the ideology itself. I think you can read it yourself. In Burma, we have, of course, the later one was Burmese way to socialism when Navin came in. Indonesia, we have the Pancasila and the Gotong Royong, and the Pancasila is the inclusive one. Philippines, you don't have a real ideology because their politics is really just personalities and corruption and stuff. Yeah, fun stuff. Okay, so Thailand, yeah, we have their nation religion king, which they can happily use it for everything. And in Singapore, we have our meritocracy, especially, and we do have certain Asian values, which is not like explicitly said, but we do use Asian values to do things. And Malaysia, we have Rukun Negara, and in Vietnam, we have communism and Confucianism. Yes, sorry, I can't pronounce. Right. So apart from ideology, we have a depoliticization. Yeah, I don't know why 5 is so long. Like, point 5 has so many things within it. Oh my gosh. Okay, sorry. So depoliticization is in Burma we have the forceful depoliticization of the Sangha. Um, and Indonesia we have the oh yeah the basically the Sangha, or yeah, like it's like the Buddhist union or something like that, I guess, like the monks. And in Indonesia we have the depoliticization through economic development. In Philippines we have depoliticization of religion during the martial law. In Thailand we have economic development and depoliticization of their Sangha. And Singapore we have economic development. Malaysia, I don't know what's going on. Vietnam, yes. Okay, so I think for the most part everyone kind of tries to depoliticize in some way or the other, either like through military force or through economic development. How this affects anything is really up to your interpretation of it. Yeah, because if you depoliticize someone, then they're less likely to do political stuff. But if it doesn't work, or if you force them to depoliticize, then eventually they might want to re-uprise and then form some kind of, like, try to get participation in the political scene. But like if you talk about Singapore, for example, people in general aren't really into politics as much, or at least they are more interested in the bread, like everyday things like doing work and stuff, rather than participating in politics per se. And it's only recently that people are being more politically inclined, I guess, especially in voting for opposition and stuff like that. Yeah. So in general, economic development can make people be more interested in economic development rather than politics in a sense. Yeah. So next one is immigrants. Burma has this anti-immigrant citizenship act thingy, and this leads to xenophobia. In Indonesia, Sukarno had xenophobia. In Suharto, he assimilated the Chinese through patron-client system, and this led to foreign investments, and that was economically good for them. However, it led to the fact that in the AFC, Asian financial crisis, the Chinese were pretty hated, even though I'm pretty sure it wasn't their fault. It was just a crisis that affected everyone. Okay, so in the Philippines, we have the economic nationalization, which means they nationalize their businesses and stuff like that. Like they try to make sure that the Filipinos actually own the thing, rather than Chinese or other immigrants and stuff like that. In 1975, they did have a relaxed rule for Chinese to get citizenship, and because the Chinese generally have a really big economic presence, the locals still kind of resent them because they Chinese are the one controlling all the economic thing in Philippines. Yeah. So in Thailand, they were anti-Chinese under these two people before World War II, and yeah, this is what happened when they were anti-Chinese. But I think after that they were kind of less anti-Chinese after a certain period of time. After World War II, I think, yeah, they kind of assimilated them more. Okay, and then Singapore and Malaysia, we can't really say that because Singapore is like literally made of immigrants in a way. Malaysia is, yeah, as I said, it is a official assimilation, unofficial compromise. Yeah. Vietnam, they were against the Chinese when the PRC relations were not going well. As we all know, there was like a bit of a tension between PR, like the communist countries as well. And yeah, like, and basically the extent of hating the Chinese depends on how much they hated China. So that's pretty much it. Okay, so what is this? What is this for? Okay, so central role of oh, okay, so in Burma we have the central role of Niwin and Tatmadaw plus the BIA. Indonesia we have the secular state constitution, tolerance of minorities. Okay, fine, okay. So for six, right? I think these are just like random extra stuff that I didn't know where to put, so you can just read them yourself. So yeah, in Burma we had that Panglong conference, right? So some minorities were not very into it, especially the people who are fighting against the Burmese. And even though the conference was actually really good, like it literally gave autonomous state and stuff like that, the minorities didn't accept it, and that leads to further tensions later on, and in the end they didn't get anything. Oh well. Okay, so for separatism, we have whether the minorities want to separate. Okay, in Burma we have, of course, the Karens, and they have the KNU, uh, and this is the AFPFL, which is the Burmese thing, and the communists broke off of AFPFL, and the minority Karens from AFPFL became the KNU. So AFPFL is like the original group that was there in independent Burma, and because of the KNU, they went against the KNU in the end. Then the KNU became an independent state. Like they wanted to be an independent state in 1948 to 1968, blah blah blah. Even though they didn't even take up the Panglong agreement, but now that another person is in charge, well, it's too late. After 8888, which is the 1988 August 8, yeah, there was more military presence to infiltrate minority areas. So because the minority didn't accept the deal at the beginning, they end up getting an even worse deal at the end. So yeah, I guess it's their bad fortune, I guess. Oh well. Okay. In Indonesia, we have separatism from East Timor, Irian Jaya, and Aceh. East Timor was successful and became a country, if you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so Aceh, we have the GAM, and they have, since they have a lot of heritage and stuff like that, there was actually quite resistance against the British, and they're more Islamic than the rest of Indonesia, and they didn't want to like cede any of their own autonomous power to Indonesia. So this led to this insurgency, which was defeated by military very easily, and afterwards they were then supported by foreign powers. I think the International Islamic, or is it the OIC? I'm not sure, but they were supported by foreign powers, but they were also defeated by militaries. And after Suharto, lost power, in 1998 to 2002, they got a ceasefire agreement which gave them a bit more autonomy. And that's pretty much the state they're in right now. Okay. In the Philippines, we have the MNLF, and yeah, we already know why they're against the rest of the Philippines. So the resources are being taken away from them. So they have their own armed forces, and they actually had a lot of OIC support, and this led to ceasefire in 1976. So yeah, so that's the Mindanao. In Thailand, we have the Pulo, and they were actually fighting for land rather than religion. As in other words, they wanted to be part of Malaysia rather than Thailand, and this was a kind of a political problem. So yeah, okay. So the rest, nothing much to say. So in terms of leadership, which is quite important, because if you don't have a good leadership, then you cannot get stuff done. So here in Indonesia, we have these people who are, pretty good leaders. They help to get something done for their region. So you can read it yourself. Okay. And then we also have external influence, which will help to determine whether they are successful in their fight. For the Philippines, they definitely had support from Sabah, and yeah, it was quite a interesting, scenario where like Malaysian states were supporting the minority movements, and the state were asking Malaysia, wait, are you like supporting the minority movement? And then they have to be like sneaky about it. Okay, so there's the Tripoli Agreement, which is about the OIC. Thailand, we have Pulo getting support from Kelantan. Oh yes, here's one very interesting thing. In the Malaysia, we have all the indigenous tribes, right, which include the Orang Asli. No one supports them, so in the end, they can't even do anything. Even if they wanted to do something, they don't have any real leader nor anyone to help them, so oh well, kind of sad. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, so this is the table which you can also try to recreate yourself, and hopefully this is useful for you. and you can then use it for your own purposes. I'm sorry this video was extremely long, but I hope it was worth it. If you found this video useful, please press the like button and subscribe. And with that, I would like to say thank you and bye.